Welcome everyone. Thanks for braving the rain and the bad weather. I am very excited to be here today with three fascinating writers and with three books that really, often for these things you read books and it's kind of a struggle to get through them, but these three were each one I picked up and it surprised me in so many ways. And the interesting thing is how much they resonated with one another, that it's so many interesting themes that we can talk about that intersect and overlap in your stories. So we will talk about 45 minutes and then there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So let me quickly introduce the writers. I have Herman Lategan, who will be talking about his book Hurkend. Herman is a journalist here in Cape Town. And then welcome Lishiva with his book Boy on the Run. Welcome is a PhD candidate in jurisprudence and also a freelance journalist. And then we have Dianne du Toit Albertze with her book Bottleneck Breeknek, which is...
Bottleneck Breekbek.
Sorry. And Dianne is a teacher and a theater maker in the Northern Cape.
Yes,
Oudtshoorn. Okay. So, I will ask, the first question is more or less the same question for all three of you, but I will ask it in three different ways. So, Herman, and I'm looking at my notes because I made some careful notes about my first impressions. This book is an account of your life story so far, but also a kind of exploration of the collective cultural unconscious of white Afrikaans society. You write from the margins of a culture in gendered and class terms in a way that is deeply personal and very interesting. And your story shines a light almost on the dysfunctions of white Afrikanerdom that impact your becoming as a person and your queer journey, but because of the humor, the love, the creativity, and the relationality, there's also something highly redemptive in how you tell the story. You find your people, you find some kind of healing, and we get to believe in the possibility of change in a culture and in some kind of way forward, even if it's not always linear and always very queer in all the senses of the word. Can you tell us more about this wonderful book? I have to sell it a bit also to convince audiences to buy it. No, just tell us about the book, your decision to write it, what brought you to this project?
I've been walking around with the story for a long time because obviously it's my story. I was lucky to grow up from the age of 0 to 6 in Kloof Street in boarding houses. And I had an eccentric mother who was very open-minded and surrounded herself with various people from that era, drag queens. She had many gay friends, which we called morphies then, and we're reclaiming that word. And in the boarding house, some very sort of tragic figures, like you would find in an Ethel Fugard play. People are living there, or Hello and Goodbye. Lonely people who have washed up in a boarding house in Kloof Street. These people, and then she had a lot of, and I say that in quotation marks, colored friends, because she came from Namakwaland, from a farm where she spoke Afrikaans, and the farm workers were her friends. So I was surrounded from a very young age by a huge influence of different people, you know, I mean, drag queens and all of that. So, I mean, that had a big impression on me and an influence on my life later on. And then what happened was that I unfortunately had to go to an orphanage for a year because my mother couldn't look after me. And then I had to go and live with this uncle of mine who was known as the hanging judge. So I had all these weird influences. The orphanage was fine, you know, it wasn't fine, I'm underplaying that. I could cope with that in a way. But with the hanging judge uncle, I was introduced to the NG Kerk, which I realized from 7 years old was a hostile institution. homophobic. I already knew there was something gay in me, and that every Sunday the preacher would, the dominee would talk about, you know, the wrongs of the woman must be in the kitchen cooking, die vrou moet haar plek ken, you must know your place, and anti-gay and anti-black. Apartheid was preached from the pulpit. That's when I got exposed to the white Afrikaner, grey shoes, grey hair, and I felt like an outsider. You know, that's where randeier. That's why I started feeling like a randeier, because I felt much more comfortable with my mother's rich array of wonderful friends. And then I was punished by these people that I was living with, by my uncle and his terrible wife. And they had 6 children, and every Sunday we had to sit, and then there was no talk, nobody spoke. You had to chew your food 25 times. She was a dietitian. So she watched me chewing it 25 times.
Sounds very Afrikaans.
Yes. And there was silence because you've just come from the church. And I say made in quotations with the background, be very sort of, she would dish up the food. She made the food because madam was too important to do anything, although she was a dietitian and could cook. And then every Sunday I had to say, wat het die dominee vandag gesê? What did the priest say? What did the dominee say? And then I would have to tell them what the dominee said. And I'm 7 years old and I'm listening because I'm a moffie. So I had to go for speech lessons. In any case, so then one day I stripped my moeder completely and she said, wat het die dominee vandag gesê?
That is one of my favorite moments in the book.
En toe sê die dominee het gesê, jou ma se pappoes. Because there's only so much a 7-year-old rebel can take. And she overstepped the mark. And thank God I was taken back to my mother, who at that stage then could take me back and was financially in the position to look after me again. And we moved to Sea Point, where we had an even wider circle of, there was a boerseun like you from Namakwaland, who was from Namakwaland, who dressed up beautifully and was called Lady Peterson. And Lady Peterson spoke in a frightfully grand British accent.
Oh, hello.
Hello, darling. And she was very dramatic, and she was introduced into my life. And so then am I talking too much? Must I get to the point?
Can start wrapping it up.
Okay. I can go on and on. But to just give you the background, that is where I came from. Those are my formative years. So I felt like an outsider always, and it was by the NG Kerk confirmed that I am an outsider. And to this day, I know we have a member of the NG Kerk here tonight. Welcome, God's rijkste seun. It has permanently, I've been in therapy about this, turned me against that church and against all organized religion. But that's another topic, so we can move on. Okay.
Okay, welcome. Boy on the Run, okay, I'm back to my notes now, is a book of rare beauty. You can already start seeing it on the cover, which is, I told welcome, it's such a cool cover. It's a story of someone who faced a lot of hardship and who had to overcome a lot to become who you are, and that's never underplayed. But what stands out in the book is the beauty and the meaning you make. It's a very almost rigorous praxis that you are so self-aware and intentional about creating beauty and creating meaning, and you know where you're going throughout, and it's what makes it so wonderful to read. So can you tell us a bit more about the book, what made you write it, and maybe something about the process, or just introduce the book from your perspective to the audience?
Thank you so much for such lovely words about the book. And the big drive for why I wrote the book was the trauma and tragedy I experienced. When I was 12, I walked in on a scene where my mom's boyfriend shot my mom and then himself. And so I walk into this scene with both of them in a puddle of blood. And I was 12. And that was devastating, as you can imagine. And I had always, my mom was such a wonderful woman who loved me very dearly. And I had always felt that her life was cut short, was disrupted, and that the day she died, we just had to, she disappeared and we had to move on, and we didn't talk much about her anymore because everyone thought it would send me into tears. And so I needed to make space for her. I needed to honor her life, and I needed it on record that, I come from this beautiful woman who was young, who was beautiful, who was very stylish.
And that's really just to footnote what you're saying there. It's so nice how you always describe her outfits and what she's doing with her hair and her nails, and it's such a pleasure to read.
And I've taken that, as you can tell, I have taken that from her, really taking it and enjoying the finer things in life despite the kind of difficulties. I went through a period where I thought I wasn't allowed to be happy because she died so tragically. She wasn't around. She wasn't happy wherever she was. And there was a time, there was a day I remember I heard her, and that when I was wallowing in that sadness of she's not here, how dare I be happy? And I heard her. It was the one time I think I actually heard her voice since she had gone, and that it makes her happy to see me happy. And since then, I committed myself to living a good life, that is a joyful life, of doing things that I love and being honest to myself about who I want to be in the world and expressing that boldly, and as she did, So writing this book was also a way for me to reclaim my voice, to say that even though I went through this tragedy and experienced this awful moment with my mom and don't have her with me, I'm still here. I was saying actually in the last session that the beauty is that the silver lining is that I'm still here to live for the both of us. And yeah, writing this book was a way for me to also take in all the love I had with her, because the memories I had with my mom, they are all I have now. But I also have her as an angel. But our memories of her on this earth together were very special to me, and it was important to me that I portray those as honestly and as beautifully as I can in the book. And yeah, and I mean also as a black queer kid growing up in the township who loved reading, I always felt like I was kind of copying and pasting myself into narratives that I was reading, that I couldn't really see myself in a lot of the stories I was reading. And so when Toni Morrison said, if there's a book you want to read that you haven't written, you must write that book, I knew the book I wanted to read, And it was that story, and the book I wanted to read was queer and had to do with the kinds of tragedies that I've experienced, but also is beautifully written as well.
It is. There's no question about that.
Thank you.
Dianne. And I think what Welcome is saying about writing the book that you don't see yet, it connects so well to your story. Or I'm saying your story now, but it's Bottleneck Breakback is a novel, but it reads extremely personally. It really feels like something written from a lot of lived experience and from someone who's been observing the world that she portrays like very closely. So it's absolutely unique in the Afrikaans language, not only because of the subject matter, but also because of the way it is written. It is a book that is queer in multiple senses, in terms of language, in terms of style, texture, almost sensibility. And yeah, it is really, I have not read anything like this in my language before. And we can also, if I say my language, that's also, if you read it, you'll see Afrikaans is also used in many different ways. We can talk about that later. But tell us about why you wrote the book, a bit about the book, introduce it to the audience.
Okay, dankie Azille. So, ja, Bottleneck Breakback. Dit was 2020 gewees.
Dianne, can we ask you to speak English?
Oh yeah, sorry. I want to speak from the heart. That's why we're talking about language now. Yeah. So 2020, I was busy with education, a postgraduate education certificate, and COVID struck, and I kind of just wanted to escape as far from myself and my family and my heritage and everything I was going through at the moment, and also my gender identity. And I really fell deep into drugs during COVID, more so than in the past, because it was always there growing up. I also had a brother who introduced me at a very young age to smoking and weed and speed and coke and all of this. And then when I actually got time to stand on my own 2 feet, I didn't know how to take care of myself. I only knew how to hurt myself or destruct myself. And in this process of self-destruction that started, I needed a way to survive and to make sure I come out alive after drug binging, after, I don't know, throwing myself into the deep side and running away. And that's where Bottleneck Breakback started. Because I told myself, Niggie, you need to come out alive. Whatever the hell you're busy with, girl, you need to come out alive on the other side. And writing has always been a form of writing not only myself, but those around me also into existence. And it kept me alive. And so the story, it started as a short story, and it just brought forth a lot of stuff I was going through personally for me to really make sense of it. So it became kind of like a reddingsbootjie, a saving boat, ek weet nie, net saving boat. A coping mechanism, dankie. Maar ook apart van daai, Ronelde Kamfer praat altyd van dat, Ronelde Kamfer, the writer, always speaks about how your creative work is also just work, it isn't just healing. That's why I'm also very adamant on it, that it's a novel. Yes, a lot of the honesty is rooted in lived experiences, but the imagination is so important. So they went a lot of work into it, especially with Trewies, who saw me somewhere in Stellenbosch, my publisher, a very dear mekaar girl she saw. And she wanted to give me a chance. I was very surprised. But I saw, okay, she's wearing also like the skeleton, like scarf or something. It also looks a bit weird like me, maybe. And I just jumped in and she gave me a chance to actually, make something of it. And to come back to writing stuff and people and myself into existence. Later on, it became a mission for me, and that's also what's still driving me. There's so many of us, and we spoke about it earlier today, on the margins. all of us need to start coming together and start showing each other also. Yes, we need to tell our own stories, but to show each other, listen, girl, I'm telling my story, so maybe it's time for you to also tell your story. For us to encourage each other, and for nation building to also become stronger, especially in the LGBTQ+. For us to stand next to each other and encourage each other to actually write through and speak through all of this trauma we have to go through, living in a violent society. And as members of the LGBTQ+, being exposed to violence on a daily basis. There's really a lot of stuff we still need to talk about. So hopefully, Bottleneck Breakback can start a conversation. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Great.
Yeah, I think... Do you want to clap? Let's clap.
Julle kan maar hande klap, thank you.
Okay, so I want to connect to what you just said, Dianne, but it was something that came up through all of the three answers and that are really, I think, a theme in all three books, is that the question of how do we tell queer stories. So it's obviously there's a lot of trauma in this extremely violent heteropatriarchal and heterocentric world, and also in our country that is particularly so. So there's the violence and there's the pain and there's the trauma. But I think what all three of these books show, or what they get beyond that, they don't reinscribe. None of these writers are reinscribing themselves only as victims of a violent world. You are asserting a kind of, and the term Catherine McKittrick uses for this is queer livingness. You are making something, you are, I think, Dianne, you just said, writing yourself into being in new ways that does not limit who you are and who you present to the world just as a kind of victim or oppressed figure. And so I was wondering if you could, maybe anyone or all of you, reflect on that process of, the process of giving, looking at the trauma, showing the violence, honoring it, but then also moving beyond it.
Yeah, I also want to jump in. The thing about, writing the queer experience, it's also, finding the humanity in it. There's a lot of universal experiences we have, especially linked to violence. And not just violence, but family as well, and home. I think all of us write about family a lot. And what family actually means, and that stuff all of us can relate to. Those things in the queer experience and the writing of it, but also to say, you know what, there is a place at the table that's maybe being prepared for us, but we also have our own table. We also have a space of our own. We don't want to conform to any ideas there is, or be accepted into the binary. We're kind of fine here where we are. Yes, maybe put the light a bit, stronger. As I suggested, a magenta, if it's possible, But to also stand true in where we are, to not change that. And I think it's so important with looking back at the writers who paved the way. Henny Oukamp, Koos Prinsloo, wat is mama se naam? Ons is almal so in die Jean Goosen, Popo vir my darling. Ja. Jean Goosen, al die skrywers wat daar is. Wat regtig vir ons paaie begin ooplos het. Who left open roads for us to follow. Simon and Corley as well, Beverly Ditsey. All of these activists and writers who have actually left a way for us. We have our own route. We don't have to go on the teerpad.
I loved something you said earlier. I went off. Excuse me, bear with me. But I wanted to say that for me, I feel like as queer people, we experience so much violence. And I think the biggest or most prominent form of violence we experience is growing up really without stories that give us an idea of how to navigate challenges that we experience as queer people. And like I said, the whole thing about copying and pasting myself into stories has been quite a challenge. Like, I only learned about Simon Koli much later on in my adult life, even with what would be considered a very good university education. That was not given to me. And so I think it's absolutely important that we write queer stories, first of all. But for me, like, my pen is in writing about myself and my experiences and challenges in the world is my way of saying I am pushing back, that the pen is really mightier than a sword, I believe, because that's my way of pushing back. And I think we absolutely must push back. The thing I loved that you said, I got my point back now, was supporting each other in telling stories, that we must tell our stories. And it's so easy for a lot of people, for any one of us actually, to think that my story doesn't matter, it's been told before, and it's been told better by more qualified people. But so much of your perspective has something to teach someone. And even in telling a story that has already been told, there is power and boldness in doing that. And I think, how we write queer stories is that we write ourselves into being, because that's not a luxury we have been given. And that is something we absolutely must fight for. I don't think we must wait and hope that someone is going to come save us and write about us. Because what happens when people write about queer people is that there's often likely to be violence of some sort, erasure of some sort, distortion of some sort. And so by me writing my story, I am pushing back against all those things. I'm saying, actually, I don't like anything you write about us, or I don't like how you write about us. And if you want to write about us, here is how you should at least try to do it, or how to think about doing it, and also to tell people to humanize our experience. I think for us, I was so anxious, and some friends would remember, I was so anxious on the day of the launch of my book, because my family was excited for it. My dad was coming out to the launch, and I remembered the sex. The sex scenes in my book, and I was like, oh my God, it's one thing that they love me and know I'm gay, but for them to read about my sex is like, your parents pretty much getting hold of your sex tape. It felt like. But it was important. I said, even at the launch, that I committed to writing an honest book, and writing about the queer experience. And part of that, a big and important part of it, is sex, and not sex. And the queer sex has also been written about, but it was also important for me to write about it in ways that I felt were not sensationalizing it or making a freak show out of it, So it's absolutely important that we write our stories, write ourselves into being and into these stories, because that's not a luxury we are given. And it's easy to take for granted that the power of representation when you are overly represented everywhere. But when you have that encounter, and a lot of people who've read the book, a lot of black queer gay men who've read the book have reached out and said that how much they have been affirmed just by being able to relate to my story. And for me, that is all the power we need, all the encouragement we need to other queer people to say, your story does matter. And when you see someone tell a story that you can relate to, you do have the feeling that, oh my God, my story actually does matter. And that's why we must write our stories.
And just another footnote, Herman, before we move to you for that answer. That sex scene in the book is my favorite one where you...
Girl, which one?
The one where you get on top of the guy and you say, his eyes roll back in his head because he's loving it so much. And and you do it so well in the sense that it's so matter-of-factly. It's just like, it's sexy, but it's also just, this is what it is, and you're not squeamish about it, and it's so well done.
That's so funny. Just before the book also came out, I went as a family, it was a funeral actually, and they were like, "Oh, your book is coming out. Is there anything we should be worried about?" And I wanted to say, passing the salt, "Oh, if you don't mind some gay sex, you should be fine." Because that was the thing. I was like, "Oh, my family reading about getting hold of the sex tape."
Herman.
It's interesting that he talks about the sex scenes in his book, because while I was writing this in Afrikaans, I left out a lot of my sexual experiences, except the part where I was molested and so forth. Even that I sort of glossed over. I am now translating the book into English, and I feel far freer to delve into the sex scenes now, which made me think that I still feel censored by Afrikaner people. And that's also a form of violence, if you think about it. Now, they talk about violence, and we different generations. I come from an era in the 80s and the 90s where I bloomed and was, on top of the sort of gay scene, and things were quite different then to now. We had gay bars and clubs that we went to that specifically in the late 80s were very mixed during apartheid. Everybody was there, but we were raided by the police. So the police would arrive suddenly and arrest people. The press, like the Cape Times and Die Burger, would then follow with cameras and take photographs of these men or women. And that would appear in the newspaper the next day. So the press was complicit. And then many of them were married men, because you had to be closeted because of the church telling you that it's wrong to be gay. So it all goes ultimately back to that brainwashing in the church. So you feel, now I have to marry, but over the weekends I'll go and have a party. Then the humiliation of being photographed, arrested, and then appearing on the front page of the paper the next day is the ultimate form of psychological violence that we had to endure.
And then we're not surprised that you struggle to write about sex in your own language, right?
Yes, yeah, because it's... So then they would have these agents provocateurs who would then... Another form of sex was cruising. We would go to toilets. It's called cottaging. The Stadteford's toilets were famous for that. So over lunchtime, you quickly went and you have a picky poo and look and mama, Havana Gila, Shalom Shabbat. And then often it was a policeman taking out his schlong. And then as soon as you touched it, Betty Bangles, they call it Betty Bangles, tronk toe, night in the cells. So they were, and then on the Sea Point Promenade, you would walk, and that was a famous cruising spot as well. It was before the time of apps. So now you go on the app and you see somebody. So you know, but this is where you could physically, it was a different era where you went onto the Sea Point Promenade or Sandy Bay. Now on the Sea Point Promenade, we were trained to really sort of hide in the bushes because the police would arrive every night. And if you were a single man just going for a walk, they would stop and ask you, but what doen jy hier? Wat doen jy hier? Is jy 'n moffie? You know, so that was also a terrible violence. In another way, I know what violence they are talking about, and I understand that. But we were specifically exposed to a physical type of cottaging, people, the provocateurs, on the beachfront, locking up, cameras flashing. I can't believe that I actually went through that, but I did, and I survived it. And so we are quite, flexible. We can survive these things. I'll never forget it, though. And I go back to the church, and I keep on, it sounds like I'm a stuck record, but it is the church that tells people that the Bible says it is wrong. And it is people who then become hypnotized and then start cherry-picking the Bible. They forget that the church also says slavery is fine, and that if a woman menstruates, she must stay at home. But no, that sexual thing is something there that they cannot incorporate. And those days are over, but not if you're a black lesbian in a township. You're subjected to terrible violence. White drag queens and white transgender people were not really exposed to any violence, but and in District 6, the morphies, as they called them then, were treated with the huge respect. The gangsters looked after them. So you couldn't touch a morphie. Screaming queen walking down the street. If you try to become violent, the gangsters would move in. But ultimately now there is a violence against young, and I say this in quotations again, colored queens, like in series where that young boy was murdered and set alight. So the violence has changed. It's gone to I am on top of the pyramid because I'm white and sort of cisgender, being camp as I am. So I am still, I am free of at the moment of any sort of violence, and I don't take it anymore because I just tell the person to fuck off, and I don't take nonsense anymore. But I think that being a black lesbian now and being a very camp colored person in South Africa is very dangerous. So the violence shifted from those days. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So the violence is still there, but it's just a different...
And forms of control and forms of
Yes.
kind of straightening people.
Yes.
Or,
Do you know what I would love to do is go with them on a Sunday morning to the Grote Kerk.
Okay.
But then I must put my lipstick on as well.
Yes, and ek my kerkhoed.
And your
Lipstick
kerkhoed.
and-
Yes, and we'll go
We can be the
and
lipstick
we'll walk
gang.
in, and I will tell you now that the reaction will be one of horror. Horror. Even despite the fact that there are so-called people in the church working. Today I opened the report again, and I mustn't say bad things about the report because I write for them. And it's not Rapport's fault, it's the people out there who write for them. These dominees going on again about analyzing the text and the hermeneutics and the symbolism in the text. I mean, a flower means a woman's vagina. I mean, you can read anything into the Bible that you want to, And I just look at this and I think that they're all straight people talking about gay people. Who gives them the right to, Jesus walked past the one man who was damaged. And that's why gay people should be embraced by people who support Jesus, because damaged. Why am I damaged as a gay person?
Yes.
So they don't even realize how tone deaf they are when they write these long, boring articles about us. It's like the National Party who got together saying, now should we unban apartheid? But no black people are involved in talking about this. So we'll talk about it. And so, I mean, it is completely bizarre that heterosexual people are talking about me as a gay person being accepted. I don't want your opinion. If I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. Thank you. I mean, that is the most bizarre thing that people, and it's very National Party in the old days. Oh, die swart gevaar, die rooi gevaar, die katholieke gevaar. But they would never engage in people, only until FW decided, because of Gorbachev actually, and the falling of the Berlin Wall and so forth, that they then sat down with black people. And okay, there was Dakar, But I mean, you cannot talk about people's freedom if you are not
Including them.
including them. Do you agree?
So I think I can connect there with, but I have so many questions and we're running out of time, but do you want to talk about language or about intersectionality? If for a second last question
Didn't
from me.
hear that.
About language or about intersectionality? Which one sounds more exciting to you? No.
I can go.
No, but I want to ask a question, so you have to tell me which side.
Ready to pounce, hey?
Intersectionality.
I think, okay, so
We've
let me...
opened up language already.
But intersectionality is also open, that's why I'm wondering.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a nice one.
Okay, so let me go with intersectionality. Then you can include language if you, because it also fits in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, all three books really envisions queer becoming and queer freedom in terms of intersectionality, right? All of you think very seriously about class. I mean, welcome, you do that very intentionally in your activism at the university. Two of you in just the lives you are living and the people you surround yourself with. You're also very much aware of violence against women specifically as a patriarchal problem more generally. So I feel all three books really think it's queer journeys, but they are never not intersectional. And do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, intersectionality, yeah, it's so broad. Yeah, it's so broad. And what does it include and what does it not include?
No, but I think I can, let me make it specific for you. You really think class and race and queerness together. You never think of your own kind of coming out or your own becoming as something that should happen separately from racial freedom and class freedom for other people.
It was Simon Corley who said he's gay and he's black, and the two can't be separated from one another. And I think that's the thing with all of us. Like Herman looking at Afrikaner identity along with the queerness and the rest. All of it is included in us. Me, myself, my background, my whiteness, my transness, all of it is always working against me or for me together. And it's important to look at it, and especially looking at queerness, not just in a middle or upper class, because there's been a lot of writings, especially in English, on trans identity, from specifically a middle to an upper class. And it was important for me to write from what I know and from where I've lived. And I experienced a type of rebirth in the colored community in Idas Valley, in Stellenbosch. And it was so important for me to highlight that family, you cannot choose family, family chooses you. And I'm not now just talking about blood family, but chosen family and what that actually means. That person who's going to open their door to you and actually allow you to be you and love you the way you want to be loved. Not all of us have the privilege of having family like that, who just love you as you are. So the intersectionalities of love, along with the violence, I guess, is important. And of course, looking at locations as well. So looking at the transness of that as well. Oh, my English, I'm just, running out of words. So the language is important and the intersectionality of it, because we cannot write about people if we're not going to try and, perform and bring justice to their language and to their expression. So why not color it in, you know? I was very irritated with a lot of old literature. I was reading stuff about Sarah Bartman, this one novel. And the language, it felt, it didn't feel art, it didn't feel earthy, it didn't feel real for me. And not just that book, numerous books. And later on, I thought, I want to write a book that's actually going to sound like someone speaking and not just something you read on a page. And that for me was something that brought me through from beginning to start. The honesty of each character and the honesty of the experiences. And looking at, also the sex scenes being like, oh yeah, my pa, I didn't even have to tell them about it. They almost skipped it themselves. Yeah, but my oma read it and she loved it. So, but yeah, my oma was also very eccentric. Oh yeah, always secretly smoking Enchies and showing me blow films on ETV, telling me to draw the boobies of the ladies if I want to be an artist. So yeah, very thankful for her, yeah. I think she brought about a lot of liberation, yeah, in me. So back to intersectionality. I think when we look at queerness, we cannot exclude the broadness of it. Herman talking about black lesbians and camp colored identities being in danger. Queerness in itself, looking at specifically the Bible, prescribed books, whatever, there's so much denial of our existence that has been happening. And that violence is also something we internalize. So looking at broader ways of loving, yeah, and queerness for me is love. There's not liefde, queerness. It's a other way of loving than the norm, yeah.
I love that. On the question, on the intersectionality, first of all, I just want to say on the Simon, we were talking about this just before we started, that I'm working with Philip Miller, who's in the audience, on a musical Vogue opera on the life and trials of Simon Ngoli, and we are currently doing a crowdfunding campaign to raise funds to be able to tell the story. So follow me and find the details of how you can support this program or this wonderful story, because we do need to tell these stories. And it was actually this project on Simon Ngoli that led me to my doctoral study. Yes. No, let's clap when the PhD is actually here. Okay? But I came across a very interesting theory as part of, trying to make sense of Simon. And it's called femme theory. And, people who are doing femme theory or femme scholarship are called femme scholars. So I like to consider myself a femme scholar. And so a big part of what femme theory says is that femininity is really at the heart of a lot of oppression and violence, and that it's often underlooked because it's often underlooked as a praxis or a point of intersection through which violence occurs. We talk about women issues, but the kind of expression and how patriarchy has sanctioned how femininity can or cannot be expressed is really at the heart of why we see so much violence against women, against queer people. It's like, how dare you express your femininity in this way, because femininity is something that is supposed to meet the patriarchal standards of how women should behave, or how people in general should behave themselves. So in kind of reading, and of course this emerges from feminist scholarships, and black feminist scholars have built a kind of big foundation for this kind of scholarship. But for me, coming across this as someone who's presented as femme and kind of being ill-treated by society because how dare you walk that way, how dare you speak like a girl, and it's always, every time you get the phrase like a girl, it's always demeaning, it's never in a good way, and that also just speaks to how femininity is always something that must be subject to kind of violence or oppression of some sort, censorship of some sort. So in me writing this book and kind of thinking through these ideas, it was very important that I give great honor as well in telling the story about the woman in my life and the kind of power in their femininity. And also as someone who embraces feminine expression myself, it's been very important for me to say, I will wear my lipstick, I'll do my nail polish, I'll do my nails, and I'll wear my flower crown. And people are gonna, that expression of femininity might not meet your expectation of how I should carry myself in the world, but it's important, and it's a very powerful way, it's a very important way for me to express power. And femininity and feminists in general is not something that is associated with power. And a big part of this, of course, has to do with the colonial legacy. And Ifeanyi Madume does an excellent job showing how in African societies, pre-colonial African societies, women and the feminine was revered as sacred, as powerful, and that the expression of it was very valuable. But colonial ways of doing things came in and said, whoa, what kind of society is this where a woman and femininity has this kind of power? And so that has to be done away with. And that's how, this kind of violence really comes up. And so for me, it was absolutely vital that I tell the story of my grandmother with reverence, with power, because really I wouldn't be as powerful, as beautiful as I am in how I express myself and carry myself in the world if it had not been for my grandmother. And the same thing goes for my mother and her relationship with her mother, that I come from a legacy of great women, and that is something that needed to be communicated. That was very important, in addition to my queerness, and that I value their femininity or their femininity or role in my life, and I value that and carry that with me in how I carry myself in the world. And perhaps, that's where the queer element comes in, because I value this femininity and I shouldn't as a man. But I think it was absolutely vital for me to give honor to the story of these women in telling my own queer story, because that is not something that has been given the power, reverence, and significance that it deserves.
And that's something very interesting that all three books have in common, is all three authors situate themselves in a feminine genealogy, and it's all three are like heroes' journeys, but in a kind of feminine line, which is fascinating to read them together in that way.
I'll wrap up. I just want to say that I want to clear up something. I just now said I'm cisgender looking and I'm white, and that gives me a position of power. What I meant by that is that, let's say the three of us walked into a restaurant and the waiter with the wine list would come to the restaurant. Who do you think is going to give it to you? To me, because I look like
the one with the beersie.
Yeah, I look like, Afrikaans vlakplaas policeman, which, except that I'm camp. But so I will get, and my friend Pierre is in the audience, he noticed it once, often when he went to a restaurant with his black boyfriend, was that when the menus were told, it was first given to him. And then, so that is also, I know it's got nothing to do with your question, but there is also an intersectionality then between us, because I currently have more power, street cred, than you have. So you've got a lot of, with me in tow, work still to do and to change people's perceptions. Does it make sense? Am I talking?
I think people need to change their perspectives.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think it's our work always.
No,
yeah.
it's not our work. Yes, I like what you.
But the power dynamics.
Yeah, the power dynamics are
it
still.
It will take time.
It will. That's what I meant. Yes. So, but the restaurant.
But that's why I dress like a rich auntie. So, hello, the ball and the menu. Yeah, please.
Okay.
Shall we open it up to the audience? Who wants to? There's a question right in front here. Where's the mic? Right over here. Put up your hand again so the guy with the mic can see. There. Yeah.
Is it on? I actually wanted to touch on the language and understand. Already, I'm hearing the Afrikaan coming through. Afrikaanness. What do you call it?
Afrikaans. Okay.
Coming through. But what exactly does it do for you? The language. Does it make it easier to understand? Does it make it? I don't know. Like, bad question. But it's. What does language do for you in terms of confirming your existence as a queer person or as someone in the queer community?
No, it's a good question.
Yeah, it is, because you know what? Yeah, thank you for the question. Somebody actually asked me, I think it was yesterday, like, what? Is your book in Afrikaans? Who the hell reads Afrikaans? Like, nobody's going to even read it. And for me, it's just, every one of us, we need to be named the way we want to be named. And I'm not just talking about preferred names or stuff like that, but also a lot of these LGBTQ plus expressions and terms are so Americanized. And somebody like Denver Breda, who's a Khoi activist and writer, told me that there was actually a name used for gender diverse people. The two-spirited, called Kam Huap. So Kam Huap was a person who was part of the LGBTQ+, back in, days before colonial ideas with the Bible came. Das man, das vrou. And it's important for us to go back to that and also to say, let's find new names for it, you know? Because I felt I didn't exist in my language. It was necessary for me to be like, we need to live here. And it's not dying out, because it will always live in so many houses and so many mouths. It will always be there. But also, of course, the violence that comes with the language is, of course, also important to recognize. But I think we're at a time now where we're reshaping stuff, ne?
Yes.
So, vintage anti-suka, yeah. Taking it and putting it a new way, yeah. A language for you guys? Afrikaner, Afrikaans?
Well, I mean, I don't write in Afrikaans, but there is I grew up in Soshanguve, and there is a particular way in which slang is spoken in Pretoria, and I really, everyone in Pretoria believes Spitori should be the 12th official language, because it's a very distinct language you can hear. And I can always tell when someone is from there, even when they speak English. I can always be like, you're from where I'm from. And so for me, it was important that comes across, because that's not a officially recognized language. And so by me kind of bringing that language into this work, I'm kind of, immortalizing it somewhat and saying, we are here and we are using this language to fit our own kind of expression, and that, language is not just this thing we have to force ourselves into and express ourselves rigidly according to these rules, but that it's actually malleable to who we are, where we find ourselves, and the kinds of issues and challenges we are facing at a time. So there is I think there's spitori, as you were, in my book. And that was also very deliberate for me because I was like, I love this language and I never get to read it in books. And like Mama Morrison said, I said, part of writing the book I want to read includes using and adding the language that I recognize as my own, even though it might not be recognized by the powers that be.
And interesting, of course, is also your decision not to translate, which closes some meaning off to some readers, but obviously opens up a whole lot of extra meaning for other readers, which is very interesting and I think politically very meaningful decision to make.
I think, yeah, I think part of that was that reading, is of course, not just reading on the page, but finding something that will then compel you to have a conversation with a friend, with someone who's from Pretoria, to say, is this a thing? Is this a language you recognize? Or so I think part of not having the translation is you will read by inference. You're gonna have to infer from what I'm saying, hopefully, but also, yeah. I just lost my train of thought, but I think I made my point.
Do you want to say something about reclaiming the M word, morphe?
Yes, no, I'll get to that, but I just want to say that I've got a terribly problematic relationship with Afrikaans. I hate it with a passion, yet I am drawn to it. And I think that the person that we have sitting here tonight is the first person to write a novel like she did, in Afrikaans, written by a trans person, transgender, in Tronktaal, in Namakwalands, in Gael, which is Moffitaal, and in what was the, you write it in 4 registers. What is the ander een nou weer? Kaaps. That has never been done in Afrikaans before. So we are sitting here tonight with somebody who has a kantelpunt. What is it in Engels?
I don't know.
No, it's treasure this moment, because in Afrikaans, South African literature, this is a very important voice that we are hearing. And I reviewed the book, and I'm very critical, and I think it is an unbelievable book. Now, talking about reclaiming the word morphe, so what? We've reclaimed it, and we've moved on.
Shall we end on that, or am I stealing another minute for
There was
one
one
more
question.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to hear all of you speak. I have probably a question that needs more than a minute, but I've been reflecting on this idea of also intersectionality now and how we refer back to another time. So I'm going to firstly date myself by saying to you, Herman, I distinctly remember you wearing an ANC t-shirt with the Koki written ANC in a club called Rita's and a police raid coming. And I think about that image in relation to this question of queerness, gayness, and whiteness, and that moment we're talking before 94, we're talking before liberation.
Yes.
How that sat with you going back to Simon and Corley, and of course, then we didn't know who Simon was. He wasn't. And then reflecting, I'm sorry, back to you, welcome, just in case you're going to get off this, is your writing around Rhodes, and there where you deal with, again, racism in an institutional academic form and your queerness there. Maybe there's something each of you might want to say about this question of queerness still, and if we think about Rhodes Must Fall and the question of how those organizations, there were accusations against patriarchy again, and how there was fallout from that. I don't know if any of you want to say something around this topic.
Very difficult, layered question.
And we'll have to make it quick.
Okay.
So.
I just want to say I did know about Simon because I met him through Ivan Toms. So I was lucky to be exposed to Ivan Toms at a very young age, and then got involved with the end conscription campaign, the UDF, etc., etc. So, and yes, I did wear a T-shirt say "Unban the ANC" when it was illegal, and that I had to run away from the police that night at Rita's, and we picked each other up. You were hiking, and I was in a car with somebody else, and he got into the car. And there was a ménage à trois.
Spilling all the beans here.
So that's the end of my. You go for you.
Well, the roads must fall moment was quite a tough one, and it was also very tough to write about. I have to say, because a big part of how racism works is that it's not like people don't just jump to the race card, like it's often the last kind of resort after having questioned yourself and your worth and value and as a black person, and only when you realize that, oh, actually that's how the system operates, that you are supposed to think of yourself as inferior and therefore second guess and question your experiences. That was tough. So having to really sit with, this was my experience of what happened, but this is my story and I'm sticking to it. That also came a lot in the process of writing this book and writing particularly about the roads part. And the queer element during the protest, I think that was the elephant in the room that was not spoken about. And even when conversations around intersectionality first became prominent in the movement, they were particularly concerned around women's issues and women feeling safe in the movement, but they weren't really centralized on queerness. And so, it was much later, and I wasn't at the university that the question of queerness was really addressed, from what I gathered, in the movement. But for me, it was absolutely vital that I was there as my queer self, and the very first time I actually wore a crop top was during the graduation party at Rhodes University, when the Black student movement said we are gonna make a statement there and wear black. And I had this crop top I had been hanging on my door for weeks because I saw it at the store and I was like, we were meant to be. And so I remember very vividly the first time I wore that crop top, and I knew I was looking good, but my body wasn't crop top friendly according to societal norms. I had my muffin top and I wore my crop top still, and I remember calling my best friend, like, I feel good, like this feels like the right thing to do, but I'm scared of the kind of reaction and backlash, and people stared me down, but people were like, you actually look good. So it was, yes, we see that you are disrupting something, but you actually look good. And for me, it was that I wanted to look good more than I wanted to disrupt what was going on there. And the crop top was black, and we had agreed to wear black, so it just made sense. So I think, I held on to kind of my expressing who I was, and it's something I've done, I think, throughout my university, career, I suppose one could say. But I've always, even when my voice was shaking, and my heart was aching over things I had to say the things I had to say, and people just had to deal with it. In school, if I didn't understand something, I was like, please explain that again, because I don't understand what you just said. And so I carried that with me, even in the movement. And that definitely did, I feel, do something, within the movement around queer expression, queer representation, because the comrades could see very clearly that I was gay and very prominent in my views about how things had to be done. So I think, holding on to my expression for me in that moment, my queer expression during The Rose Must Fall, was important even as there wasn't a direct conversation about it.
We'll have to end there. Thanks, everyone. This was so interesting, and thanks for sharing so generously about your process and what you've been through. And thanks to the audience. Have a nice day.
And thanks to you.